The autumn morning in Portland, Maine, carried the crisp scent of fallen leaves as antique appraiser Sarah Mitchell stepped into the Victorian home on Elm Street. The Whitmore estate sale had drawn collectors from across New England, but Sarah's trained eye immediately focused on a small collection of photographs displayed on an ornate mahogany table. Among the sepia-toned portraits and family gatherings, one particular photograph caught her attention. It was a formal studio portrait from 1914, featuring a stern-looking mother seated rigidly in an ornate chair, her 3 children arranged around her like porcelain dolls. The photograph bore the embossed mark of Morrison Photography, Chicago, indicating it was taken at one of the city's most exclusive establishments. The family appeared prosperous, their clothing suggesting upper-middle-class status during the pre-war era. Sarah lifted the silver frame, examining the image more closely. The composition was typical of the period, formal, controlled, stoic. Yet something about the mother's posture seemed unusual. While the children gazed directly at the camera with expected Victorian expressions, the woman's left hand was positioned oddly, her fingers curved as if concealing something. "Interesting piece, isn't it?" came a voice behind her. An elderly woman approached, introducing herself as Margaret Whitmore, the great-granddaughter of the home's original owners. "Do you know anything about this family?" Sarah asked, her professional curiosity piqued. Margaret shook her head slowly. "That photograph came with some other items we inherited. I believe it belonged to a family named Blackwood. Beyond that, I'm afraid I know nothing about their story." But Margaret's expression darkened as she continued. "Though I will say, my grandmother always claimed there was something unsettling about that particular photograph. She kept it locked away in the basement for decades." Sarah studied the image once more, that peculiar positioning of the mother's hand nagging at her instincts. Something was wrong with this picture. Terribly wrong. Back in her downtown Portland office, Sarah placed the photograph under her professional magnifying equipment. Years of appraising antiques had taught her that the most valuable discoveries often lay in the smallest details that others overlooked. As she adjusted the focus and lighting, the image became startlingly clear. The mother's dress was perfectly pressed, the children's clothes spotless, but it was the woman's hand that drew Sarah's complete attention. Between Eleanor Blackwood's fingers, barely visible in the original viewing, was the edge of something white. It appeared to be paper, a small piece, carefully concealed, yet not entirely hidden from the camera's lens. But as Sarah looked closer, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The children's eyes weren't looking at the camera at all. They were darting towards something just outside the frame, their small faces showing unmistakable signs of terror that the primitive photography had rendered nearly invisible. The way Eleanor's fingers curved suggested she was holding the paper deliberately, perhaps hoping it would go unnoticed. But there was desperation in her grip, the white-knuckled tension of someone clinging to something precious or dangerous. Sarah's pulse quickened. In her 15 years of appraising historical items, she'd learned that people often hid significant things in plain sight, especially during times of crisis. The year 1914 was particularly significant. World War I, social upheaval, families facing impossible decisions. She photographed the detail with her high-resolution camera and enhanced the image on her computer. The white object became slightly more distinct, appearing to be folded paper. But as the digital enhancement processed, Sarah stumbled backward from her desk. There was writing on the paper, faint but definitely there. And what she could make out made her hands shake. "They're watching. Help us." Sarah reached for her phone and dialed her colleague, Dr. James Reed, a historian specializing in early 20th century American social history. "James, I have something that might interest you," she said, her voice containing an excitement mixed with unease. "It's a 1914 family portrait, but there's something the mother is hiding, something she was terrified others would see." "Send me the images," James replied immediately. 1914 was a pivotal year. Families were dealing with more than just war and economics. There were other things happening, things people didn't talk about. Dr. James Reed examined the high-resolution images Sarah had sent, his historian's mind immediately recognizing the potential significance. But as he studied the photograph under his own magnification equipment, he discovered something that made him call Sarah immediately. "Sarah, you need to see this. I've enhanced the background of the photograph, and there's something there. something that shouldn't be possible. When Sarah arrived at the university, James had the photograph displayed on his large computer monitor. "Look at the studio background," he said, pointing to what appeared to be empty space behind the family. "See that shadow pattern? It's not from the studio lighting." As Sarah stared at the screen, she could make out the faint outline of a fourth figure standing directly behind Eleanor Blackwood. The figure appeared human at first glance, but something was wrong with its proportions. Too tall, arms too long. "The Morrison Photography Studio mark is our first real clue," James explained, his voice tense. Edmund Morrison ran one of Chicago's most exclusive studios from 1890 to 1914. But here's what's disturbing. The studio burned down the day after this photograph was taken. Morrison was never found. James had spent the morning making calls to various Chicago historical societies. The Chicago History Museum confirmed they had acquired Morrison's remaining business records, but most had been damaged in the fire. What survived painted a troubling picture. "I'm driving to Chicago tomorrow," Sarah announced. "This mystery is getting darker by the hour." The next morning found Sarah in the climate-controlled archives of the Chicago History Museum. The Morrison photography collection was smaller than expected, more. Most records had been destroyed in the mysterious fire of October 16, 1914. She began with the surviving appointment book, scanning through months of entries. Under October 15, 1914, she found it. Blackwood family, emergency sitting, 4 p.m., payment, $25. Special arrangements requested. The entry was written in Morrison's hand, but there was something else. Scrawled in different ink, as if added later, were the words, "God help them, the woman knows." Sarah's hands trembled as she photographed the entry. The next step would be researching the Blackwood family, but she sensed she was uncovering something far more sinister than a simple family portrait. A librarian approached her table, an elderly man with kind eyes but a troubled expression. "Researching the Morrison fire?" he asked quietly. Sarah nodded. "Strange case," he continued. "Morrison's assistant was found 3 blocks away, completely mad. Kept saying he'd seen something impossible in the darkroom, something that shouldn't exist." The Chicago Public Library's genealogy department became Sarah's next destination. Armed with the name Blackwood, she began piecing together the family story through city directories, census records, and newspaper archives. The 1910 census revealed the family's composition. Eleanor Blackwood, age 28, listed as a widow. Sons Thomas, age 8. William, age 6, and James, age 4. No father listed. The family lived in a modest home on the south side of Chicago. But as Sarah delved deeper into 1914 newspaper archives, she discovered information that made her stomach turn. The Chicago Tribune from October 17, 1914, just 2 days after the photograph, contained a small notice. Local woman Eleanor Blackwood committed to Danvers State Hospital following complete mental breakdown. Claims of supernatural harassment. More disturbing was an item from the Chicago Herald dated October 20, 1914. 3 Blackwood children reported missing. Search team investigation ongoing. Mother remains hospitalized, claiming invisible forces took her sons. Sarah's heart raced. The family had sat for their photograph just days before Eleanor's complete mental collapse and the disappearance of her children. The desperate message hidden in her hand suddenly took on a horrifying new meaning. The reference librarian, noticing Sarah's intense focus, approached her table. "Are you researching the Blackwood disappearances?" she asked quietly. Sarah looked up, surprised. "Tragic case," the librarian continued. "Those 3 little boys were never found. Eleanor Blackwood spent the rest of her life in the asylum, claiming something inhuman had taken them. She died there in 1947, still insisting her story was true." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Whatever Eleanor Blackwood had hidden in her hand during that October afternoon in 1914 suddenly seemed far more significant than a simple cry for help. Sarah's research took her to the Cook County Records Office, where commitment papers and search team reports from 1914 were housed. The Blackwood case file was surprisingly thick, containing investigation reports, witness statements, and medical evaluations. Eleanor Blackwood's commitment papers revealed a woman in complete psychological collapse. Dr. William Harrington's evaluation dated October 18, 1914 stated, "Patient exhibits extreme paranoid delusions, claims to have been stalked by inhuman entities for several months, insists that beings not of this world have been watching her family, violent when questioned about object concealed in photograph." But as Sarah read the search team reports, she discovered something that challenged the official narrative. Officer Patrick McManus had been the first to respond to the missing children report. His initial notes, written in hurried script, told a different story. Arrived at Blackwood residence October 18, 2 p.m. House appears undisturbed, no signs of forced entry or struggle. However, found children's beds arranged in perfect formation facing the single window. Neighbor misses. Catherine Murphy reports seeing tall shadows moving through the Blackwood house for several nights before the disappearance. Claims shadows were wrong-shaped and moved in ways that hurt to watch. The investigating detective's follow-up report was even more disturbing. Despite thorough search of surrounding area, no trace of the 3 Blackwood children has been found. Most unusual aspect: family dog was found dead in backyard. No visible cause of death, but animal appears to have died of fright. Eyes wide open, mouth frozen in silent scream. Sarah photographed every relevant document, her mind struggling to process what she was reading. The official story painted Eleanor as a mentally ill woman whose children had simply run away or been taken by human predators. But the details suggested something far more sinister. In the evidence inventory, Sarah found a detail that made her hands shake. Subject's photograph examined shows family of 4, though only 3 children reported. 4th figure visible in background shadows upon magnification. Identity unknown. Morrison's studio records, those that survived the fire, provided the final piece of the puzzle. Sarah found Edmund Morrison's personal journal, water-damaged but legible. The final entry, dated October 15, 1914, Prive, the day of the Blackwood portrait, was written in increasingly frantic handwriting. "The woman came to me desperate, clutching a small paper in her hand. She begged me to take their photograph, claiming it might be the only proof that would remain. She kept looking over her shoulder, insisting they were getting closer. I set up the equipment despite my unease. During the sitting, I noticed the children were terrified, not of the camera, but of something behind me. When I turned to look, I saw nothing. But when I developed the plate, God forgive me, when I developed the plate, there was something there. Something that shouldn't exist." The woman's paper contained desperate pleas for help, written to anyone who might find the photograph. She knew what was coming. She knew they would take her children. The thing in the photograph, it's not human. And it's been watching her family for months. "I've hidden the original plate. If something happens to me, perhaps someone will understand." The woman's hidden message is the key. She knew the truth about what hunts in the shadows of our world. That evening, Sarah could barely sleep. The mystery had evolved from a simple historical curiosity to something that challenged her understanding of reality itself. Morrison's journal suggested that Eleanor Blackwood hadn't been insane. She had been hunted by something beyond human comprehension. The next morning, Sarah returned to the museum with a specific request. She needed to examine any surviving photographic plates from Morrison's studio, particularly any that might have been hidden or overlooked after the fire. The curator led her to a storage room in the basement, where fire-damaged materials were kept in climate-controlled conditions. "Most of Morrison's plates were destroyed," he explained. "But we did find one hidden in a metal box buried in the studio's foundation. It was discovered during the building demolition in 1923. The metal box contained a single glass plate negative and a letter addressed, 'To whoever finds this, the truth must be preserved.' The letter was signed by Edmund Morrison and dated October 15, 1914. When Sarah held the glass plate up to the light, her blood turned to ice. The negative showed the Blackwood family clearly, but the 4th figure Morrison had written about was unmistakably visible. Standing directly behind Eleanor, its impossibly long arms reaching toward her shoulders, was something that defied natural law. The creature's face was a void of darkness where features should have been, except for 2 pinpricks of light that seemed to burn through the glass itself. But what made Sarah drop the plate, which shattered on the concrete floor, was the realization that the entity was looking directly at the camera. looking directly at anyone who would ever see this image. Looking directly at her. As the pieces of glass scattered around her feet, Sarah heard something that made her question her sanity. A whisper, seeming to come from the shattered negative itself, speaking in a voice that sounded like Eleanor Blackwood. Now you've seen the truth. Now you know what took my children. And now, it knows you know. Sarah's investigation into Eleanor Blackwood's hidden message led her to a startling discovery. Using advanced digital restoration techniques on the shattered glass plate, she was able to reconstruct the image and enhance the paper Eleanor had clutched so desperately. The message, written in Eleanor's careful script, read, October 10th, 1914. They have been watching us for 3 months. Tall shadows that move wrong. My children wake screaming, claiming the long man stands at their window. I've seen it too. Something that wears the shape of a person but isn't human. It wants my boys. I don't know why. This photograph may be the only proof that we existed as a family. If you find this, please remember us as we were, not as what we became after it took them. Eleanor Blackwood. But there was more. At the bottom of the note, in increasingly frantic handwriting, it's coming for them tonight. I can feel it watching through the walls. If anyone finds this, look for the children in the place where shadows gather. Look for them in the space between. Save them if you can. They're still alive. Somewhere. Somehow. The implications were staggering. Eleanor hadn't been protecting evidence of a cruel act, was she had been documenting an encounter with something beyond human understanding. The photograph wasn't just a family portrait. It was evidence of a predator that existed outside the normal world. Sarah's research took a darker turn when she discovered that the Blackwood disappearances weren't unique. Similar cases had occurred in Chicago during 1913 and 1914. Children vanishing without trace, parents claiming to have seen impossible figures stalking their families. The pattern was always the same. Families reported being watched by tall shadows for weeks or months before the children disappeared. Parents who tried to report these stalkers were dismissed as mentally unstable. The children were never found. Dr. James Reed had uncovered records from Danvers State Hospital showing that Eleanor Blackwood wasn't the only parent committed after claiming their children had been taken by inhuman entities. Between 1913 and 1915, 7 mothers and 3 fathers had been institutionalized with identical delusions. All of them drew the same figure when asked to describe their stalker: impossibly tall, arms too long, face like a void. All of them insisted their children were still alive, somewhere else. All of them died in the asylum, never recanting their stories. But the most disturbing discovery came when Sarah found Morrison's missing assistant, Thomas Hartwell, in the records of Chicago State Mental Hospital. Hartwell had been committed the night of the studio fire, completely catatonic except for one repeated phrase. The photograph opened a door. The photograph let it through. The hospital records showed that Hartwell had drawn the same entity over and over again for 30 years until his death in 1944. In his final drawing, dated just days before he died, he had written, "It's still hunting. The shadows are still hungry. The children are still screaming in the place between worlds." Sarah's investigation had revealed a conspiracy of silence around something that challenged the very foundations of reality. The Blackwood photograph wasn't just evidence of a single tragedy. It was proof of an ongoing predation that authorities couldn't acknowledge without admitting the existence of something beyond their ability to comprehend or control. 6 months after discovering Eleanor Blackwood's secret, Sarah stood before a packed auditorium at the Chicago History Museum, presenting her findings to historians, paranormal researchers, and family members of the other missing children from 1913 to 1915. The evidence she had uncovered painted a disturbing picture of systematic supernatural predation that had been covered up or dismissed as mass hysteria. The Eleanor Blackwood photograph had become a symbol of how easily truth could be buried when it challenged accepted reality. But Sarah's presentation took an unexpected turn when she displayed the restored image from Morrison's hidden glass plate. As the photograph appeared on the large screen behind her, several audience members gasped and pointed. The shadowy figure was clearer than ever, its void-like face seeming to stare directly into the auditorium. And then, as Sarah watched in horror, the figure in the photograph moved. Slowly, deliberately, it turned its head to look directly at her, its burning eyes meeting hers across time and space. The lights in the auditorium flickered. Members of the audience began to whisper anxiously, and from somewhere in the darkness of the projection booth came a sound that made everyone freeze, the unmistakable voice of a child crying, "Mama, it's coming back. It's coming for the others." Sarah realized with absolute terror that by uncovering Eleanor Blackwood's secret, she had done more than solve a historical mystery. She had reopened a door that should have remained forever closed. The entity that had taken the Blackwood children hadn't disappeared in 1914. It had been waiting, watching, hunting in the shadows between worlds. And now, thanks to her investigation, it knew exactly where to find its next victims. As the auditorium plunged into darkness and the sound of children crying echoed from impossible directions, Sarah understood Eleanor's final, terrible truth. Some secrets are meant to remain hidden, not because they're false, but because revealing them gives power to things that should never have power over our world. The 1914 studio photograph had indeed contained a secret worth hiding. But it wasn't evidence to be preserved for justice. It was a warning to be heeded for survival. Eleanor Blackwood's courage in hiding that message had kept the door closed for over a century. Now, in her determination to uncover the truth, Sarah had opened it again. And something ancient, hungry, and impossibly patient was finally free to continue its hunt. Educational conclusion. While this story is fictional, it draws from fascinating real aspects of early 20th century photography and the documented phenomenon of mass disappearances during that era. The period between 1910 to 1920 saw numerous unexplained vanishings, particularly of children, that remain unsolved to this day. Victorian and Edwardian photography studios were indeed elaborate operations requiring long exposure times and careful positioning. The formal, rigid poses we associate with old photographs were necessary due to the primitive equipment that required subjects to remain perfectly still for several minutes. The concept of hidden messages in photographs was actually common during this period. Families often concealed meaningful objects, letters, or symbols in formal portraits as a way of preserving important information or memories. Professional photographers sometimes participated in these practices, understanding that a photograph might be the last record of a family facing uncertain times. The year 1914 was particularly significant for American families, marking not just the beginning of World War I, but also a period of social upheaval, economic uncertainty, and mass immigration that created ideal conditions for both real, cruel acts and urban legends to flourish. Many photography studios from this era did experience mysterious fires, often destroying irreplaceable historical records. The loss of these archives has created gaps in our historical understanding that continue to fuel speculation and mystery. The phenomenon of mass hysteria, or shared delusions, was well documented during the early 20th century, often occurring in communities under stress. These episodes sometimes involved multiple families reporting similar supernatural encounters, leading to complex questions about the difference between shared psychological experiences and unexplained phenomena. Professional investigators and historians continue to study the numerous unexplained disappearances from this era, applying modern forensic techniques to century-old cases. While most have conventional explanations, some remain genuinely puzzling, leaving room for continued speculation about what really happened to the missing families of America's past. The preservation of family photographs and documents remains crucial for understanding our history, as these personal artifacts often contain the only evidence of lives that would otherwise be forgotten by time.